Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. The Ukraine War Frontline update for the 26th of May 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, then please check out the key on the screen at the moment. Otherwise, let's go to the front line, to the northern sector by Kharkiv, where the Russians have been launching some attacks. Two main areas of attack, although Zelensky did today announce that there was going to be another Russian attack. The Russians are mounting an attack somewhere about, he says, 90 kilometers northeast of Kharkiv. So that's sort of going into the Sumy Oblast. That may or may not happen, I don't know, but there are claims that there are some 15,000 Russian troops in the Sumy area. There were claims that there's up to 50,000 troops in this Kharkiv offensive that have been stalled, right? The Ukrainians have drawn troops from elsewhere on the front line. They've had to draw in some reserves and whatnot, but they have succeeded in stopping that attack, and that's really significant. I'm not sure of the wisdom of Russia attacking Sumy area as well. I think it will be quite attritional for them. I think the Russians will probably come across more well thought out fortifications and minefields, as far as I understand it. Yeah, just not too sure about that one. There are claims that say the forces in Krinky have pulled out of Krinky on the Dnipro River to reinforce Kharkiv. We'll come to that later. There's some interesting mapping going on there that doesn't suggest that's the case. There have been denials that that's the case, but I think it probably is the case nonetheless. The important point is, for me, that there are no changes to the front lines up in this northern area, apart from a very small element of Ukrainian advance for deep state map that I don't actually have up on the screen at the moment. Let's make sure we have that yellow line of deep state maps there. So just a very slight, but it's probably just a rejig, to be in all honesty. But yeah, there's all this talk about the dooming and glooming of this attack, and it seems to have been stopped. There are claims in the Institute for the Study of War that the Ukrainians are pushing the Russians back, particularly in this more western sector there. No change in Vovchansk, which is interesting. So yeah, I'm going to be obviously watching this area closely. I just want to know whether the Russians go, oh dear, well, that's that, or whether they double down, or whether this is all part of their planning anyway. They're expecting to be slowed down, and they're just going to grind out some further successes there. You know, what is their end game, and what's their metric of success, or what are their metrics of success, and does this put an end to their attack? So, yeah. We'll then move on to the northeastern sector from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. Some gains for the Russians, as agreed upon by all the mappers here. Syriac Maps has fairly substantial gains in this Ivanivka, Kotalirivka area, Kislivka, just north of Kislivka. The Russians have, as I say, according to Syriac Maps, taken some large gains all the way to north of Ivanivka and taken control of Ivanivka. Deep State map and Andrew Perpetua's mapping is a little less charitable than that, saying that the Russians have robust control of most of Ivanivka. But as I've said before, this isn't the end of the world, this kind of area. If I was the Ukrainians, I'd be like, right, we'll try and stall them, we'll try and make it as attritional as possible, but this isn't super important. You don't want to let them get too close to Kupiansk here, but yeah, be happy to cede them enough land around this area and keep it costing the Russians for every mile that they take, or every kilometer that they take. No changes further to the south of there, around Stelmakivka, around Tabaivka even, and then down to the Tulska-Terny salient, where the Ukrainians have been pushing the Russians back there. No change there. Bilahorivka, quiet. Spirna area in that northern Bakhmut salient in Seversk sector is quiet, or at least there are no changes. Sorry, I'm using the wrong words there. It's not necessarily quiet. Often fighting all over the place. And Chaziv Yar, look at this. No change there at all to all the mappers. This is fairly significant because actually this mapping is a day and a half. I didn't do a mapping update yesterday, and I've just done this one today, and this is a day and a half. This is essentially 2 days worth of mapping, and actually you've not got a lot of change here. A slight element of gain for the Russians in Klishchivka, according to deep state maps. I know why Andrew Perpetua has not changed this. There are Russians who go into Klishchivka, but there's no shelter there. And so what they do is they rush in, stick a flag up here, flag gets blown up. Do they control it? I mean, they don't have bases there. They don't have places where they can shelter their troops particularly. So you can kind of go in and go out, but I don't think there's much evidence that the Russians are staying in there. So this, to me, I'd agree with Andrew Perpetua, is probably safely grey zone. The question is what's going on in this area. And the other mappers do not have, as in Deep State Map and Andrew Perpetua, do not have the Russians controlling this trench line. This could be the second time that Syriac Maps has claimed the Russians control this whole trench network based on what the Russian MOD might have said, and that not being the case. So this happened before, and then they actually walked it back, Syriac Maps, and said, no, okay, bit by bit, no, they don't. And they had it back to here, and then straight away, almost like a couple of days after they had walked that back, they then said, right, Russia have now taken all of this area, and took it even further, all the way down here. And I'm just not sure that is correct. As you can see, there's a vast difference between what Syriac Map says in this entire area. I mean, that is a big old area that there's this huge disagreement in. If you're looking at that, that's a lot to get wrong. Somebody is wrong there. Either Deep State Map and Andrew Perpetua are wrong, or Syriac Maps is wrong, and my bet is on the latter. Anyway, coming further to the south, that's not to say that there aren't Russians in those areas causing the Ukrainians some issues. Coming down further to the south, we have the Avdiivka area, and here we have some small games, according to Andrew Perpetua, north of Ocheritina. Not particularly significant, and well within what Syriac Maps has already claimed is the case. There's more significant gains around Umanska, which is just on the Derna River. So the Derna River was holding the Russians back for some time from Berdichi. Then it doglegged round here to Umanska. You had Semenivka and Orlivka down here. The Russians have got across that now and are inching further to the west. Here they are doing it around Umanska, where they are expanding their bridgehead there across that river. Well, all the mappers now agreeing that the Russians are controlling area north of that river. It's just where they, some of the finer details, I guess, to the south and to the north, but the general agreement around there. That's why there's a lot of those pins, and that's quite a bit of change over the 2 days. Some of those were like 2 days of change, like one part and then the other part. That's happening there. No change to Krasnohorivka and Mariinka in this Herivka area, or at Novomerkalivka onto Paraskovivka here. So these three main flashpoints that we have seen. We've previously seen sort of pulses, maybe pulses here and then everywhere else quiet, and then in one of the other places. It seems that Avdiivka around here is fairly consistent, as in Netalove and Umanska. This is where it's been active for a week or so, consistently. But the other places, maybe a little gain here, maybe a little gain there. But actually, I think it's a lot more stable than it previously was. That's not to say that the Russians might just be taking a breather, ready to go again. But like I keep talking about, what is their strength in depth? Do they really have the ability to continue on? What are their objectives along this whole eastern front line? If you're putting 50,000 troops up there, then I'm wondering whether it is really all about the Donbass, or were those 50,000 troops all about being able to take more land in the east? Well, if it's slowed down in the east, in as a parallel with slowing down in that north as well, then you're thinking, I'm not really sure you've achieved an awful lot at all. Either way, so yeah. On the southern front line, no changes to Velika Novosilka and Robotsina. Good news for the Ukrainians. No changes. Good change is good news. Sorry. And then we come to the Dnipro River and Krinky here, and the claims are that, and these claims have now got out. I knew about this sort of a week or so ago, that the Ukrainians had pulled out of Krinky, and you've got several claims confirming that. But then alongside of that, Syriac Maps has just changed to the Ukrainians controlling further down toward Kazachyi-Lahiri, or at least the Russians being pushed back from there, not necessarily the Ukrainians controlling. So they were up to here, and then look at this. This is the largest change we've seen in this area for a good long time, and that appears to be going alongside the idea that the Ukrainians are fully pulled out of that area. So I don't quite know what's going on here with all these mixed messages. There were, just as they were pulling out, there was a claim that they were moving downwards. So this just could be some delayed information coming through, that the Ukrainians took this area before pulling out to go and support possibly Kharkiv. And there were claims that they were getting more favourable positions along the left bank, which is along this same bank. So this is the left bank. Remember, it's the direction of the river flowing. So this is your left bank here, and this is your right bank up here. So it claims that the Ukrainians these weren't favourable positions, and we know that because this place is completely flattened. All the imagery that is coming out of this area suggests that it is a nightmare for trying to get shelter. So you might think that all those buildings signify lots of shelter, but actually this is the reality of those buildings. It's just completely flattened. There's a lot of grass in between sort of rubbleized buildings, and then we have another one down here, and these are showing these sort of propagation tunnels by the looks of it. If I can bring it up, I cocked that one up. Anyway, it's not coming up, but yeah, so it is not, there we go. It is not a good place to try and house your troops, shelter them. There are several things that might be going on here. So the Ukrainians were pushing down to get better shelter in areas that weren't completely rubbleized, and that's what they're doing. And then they pulled out, or they haven't pulled out, so they could still be around here, but less so up in the Krunki areas where they were. There are also claims that the whole raison d'etre, as I've been claiming, for the Ukrainians to be here is that Russians have pulled lots of equipment to try and dislodge them from there, and this was a kind of bait to get the Russians to pull their personnel and equipment into drone range. And Magyar's birds in this area were absolutely hammering the Russian equipment to the point that they lost several hundred pieces of kit around here, if I remember correctly, and an awful lot of personnel. But actually, and it did take them far too long, the Russians may well have adapted to that and are no longer piling in all this equipment into the area. So it makes it less worth it for the Ukrainians to continue to stay on the left bank of the Dnipro. And I guess, see, if I was in charge of the Russians, I would have said, right, let's leave them there, let's contain them, but we don't need to charge in and lose all our stuff. Just make sure they're contained there, and maybe bring up some artillery eventually, and hammer it all at once, or aviation smack the crap out of it all at once, but not this drip feed of bringing stuff in and having it attrited, bringing stuff in and having it attrited. So it could be that they've adapted to that and have allowed them to kind of remain there without really hammering them too much. And then the Ukrainians said, well, it's not worth us being there, plus we need to help out in Kharkiv, so we're going to get out of Dodge, and that could be what has happened. But I'm not 100% sure. There is conflicting, as I mentioned, conflicting evidence coming out there. Surat Map says the situation on the Kherson front over the past 3 weeks, Ukraine has gradually moved from the village of Krunki into the neighbouring village of Kazachyi-Lahiri. That's Cossack camps. With the start of the new operation, Ukrainian forces completely abandoned Krunki and moved north and southwest. However, it cannot be said that the locality has been recaptured by the Russian army. The village is destroyed and it's impossible to consolidate there. Easy entry of Ukrainian troops into Kazachyi-Lahiri is due to the lack of presence of Russian personnel there. In fact, it is in reality that along the bank of the Dnipro there is no real Russian presence, which is to be found in the defences located a few kilometres inland. And that may well be correct, right? Because the drone activity from the Ukrainians is so well established here that there's no point having Russian troops defending along here. As long as the Russians can keep an eye on what's going on, just to protect against any major incursion across the river, then there's no point being right there, and you might as well be in better defences kilometres back from the river. And that seems to be what Surat Maps is intimating there, and I'd possibly go along with that. So that's the Frontline update for today. to think that's 2 days worth of update, I think is very good news for the Ukrainians. There might be a further update today, and depending on time, I might be able to get that out. But nonetheless, that gives you a sense of what's going on, or indeed what isn't going on, perhaps in a lot of these places. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Speak to you soon.